Great.
Good morning. Good morning to you all. And I'm glad to see you here today. So it's a good day to be together without the necessity of driving around. And to enjoy sitting together in that way, wherever you are. So the last few sessions we've been talking about this poem of Shito, the 8th century Chinese teacher, Song of the Grass Roof Hermitage. And just to put it, we're sort of going through a stanza or two at a time, but it's a relatively short poem. So I'm going to, again, read the whole poem so that there can be some context to what we're talking about. Song of the Grass Roof Hermitage. I've built a grass hut where there's nothing of value. After eating, I relax and enjoy a nap. When it's completed, fresh weeds appeared. Now it's been lived in, covered by weeds. The person in the hut lives here calmly, not stuck to inside, outside, or in between. Places worldly people live, he doesn't live. Realms worldly people love, he doesn't love. Though the hut is small, it includes the entire world. In 10 feet square, an old man illumines forms and their nature. A great vehicle, Bodhisattva, trusts without doubt. The middling or lowly can't help wondering, will this hut perish or not? Perishable or not, the original master is present, not dwelling south or north, east or west, firmly based on steadiness. It can't be surpassed. A shining window below the green pines. Jade palaces or vermilion towers can't compare with it. Just sitting with head covered, all things are at rest. Thus, this mountain monk doesn't understand at all. Living here, he no longer works to get free. Who would proudly arrange seats trying to entice guests? Turn around the light to shine within, then just return. The vast, inconceivable source can't be faced or turned away from. Meet the ancestral teachers, be familiar with their instruction. Bind grasses to build a hut, and don't give up. Let go of hundreds of years and relax completely. Open your hands and walk innocent. Thousands of words, myriad interpretations are only to free you from obstructions. If you want to know the undying person in the hut, don't separate from this skin bag here and now. So I guess before going on to the passages that I'd like to focus on today, I'll reflect back to one passage we discussed last week. Though the hut is small, it includes the entire world. In 10 feet square, an old man illumines forms and their nature. This passage always reminds me of something, and we did talk about this grass hut poem a few years back, and I referred to the same passage at that time in the same way, and I beg your forgiveness if you have an excellent memory and recall all this and find it repetitive, but it reminds me of a passage from the script of a movie that I've watched a number of times, My Dinner with Andre. And the background here is that Andre is talking with Wally. Andre is a movie director and Wally is a playwright, and they live in New York, and they're meeting after a long interval of separation. And Andre is going through this long description of all the adventures he's had on his spiritual quest, which have involved trips to the Sahara Desert and to India and to Tibet and various extraordinary things that he's done. And they get to near the end of the conversation, and Wally, who is sort of a struggling playwright in New York and lives a more conventional life, says, "But I mean, the main thing, Andre, is why do we require a trip to Mount Everest in order to be able to perceive one moment of reality? Is Mount Everest more real than New York? Isn't New York real? I mean, I think if you could become fully aware of what existed in the cigar store next door to this restaurant, it would blow your brains out. I mean, isn't there just as much reality to be perceived in a cigar store as there is on Mount Everest? What do you think? I mean, I think that not only is there nothing more real about Mount Everest, I think there's nothing that different. In a certain way, I mean, reality is sort of uniform in a way. So that if your perceptions, I mean, if your own mechanism is operating correctly, it would become irrelevant to go to Mount Everest, and sort of absurd because, well, I mean, of course, I mean, on some level, obviously, it's very different from a cigar store on 7th Avenue. And then he goes on. But for those of us who haven't been driven mad by the pandemic, I think we've come to appreciate the value and the beauty of confined spaces. How it's possible that though the hut is small, it includes the entire world. And in 10 square feet, it is possible to illumine forms and their nature. So the passage that I would like to focus on today follows that. And I'll see if I can bring this up. Just sitting with head covered, all things are at rest. Thus, this mountain monk doesn't understand at all. Living here, he no longer seeks to get free. Who would proudly arrange seats trying to entice guests? Turn around the light to shine within, then just return. The vast, inconceivable source can't be faced or turned away from. Meet the ancestral teachers. Be familiar with their instruction. Find grasses to build a hut and don't give up. So just sitting with head covered, all things are at rest. Another translation of this, which I think is more free and perhaps fabricated a bit, is with a patched cape over the head, the 10,000 affairs come to rest. Other translations just talk about covered head. And I don't think the monks at that time routinely wore hoods or capes over their heads when they were inside. So I tend to think he's just talking about the grass hut itself, the shelter that he has made for himself. To allow him to live with reasonable comfort in this conventional world. And again, as in other passages, he's encouraging us to relax. Just sitting with head covered, all things are at rest. And then he says, this mountain monk doesn't understand at all. This poem was probably written towards the end of his life. We don't know, but he refers to himself as an old man. He lived until he was about 80. This mountain monk doesn't understand at all. I think, part of, and it may seem paradoxical, but part of learning is coming to understand how little you know. Now, in Western traditions, Socrates was fond of talking to people, especially people who thought they knew something, especially people who thought they understood justice or beauty or love. And he was fond of just querying them, asking them questions. And usually towards the end of the dialogue that Plato would recount, the person who thought he understood this or that had more questions than answers. So I think there is, in this maturation process, not only the process of picking up facts here and there, but also understanding how the greater questions remain unanswered and probably unanswerable. Living here, he no longer works to get free. Again, I think early in the spiritual quest, it it seems like it takes a lot of effort. There's just so much to read, so much to experience, so much to do, so many practices to perfect, so many concepts to delve. And then at some point, sometimes it feels like it's no longer necessary, that we have what we need, that it's all here. No longer is necessary to work so hard for the freedom that we desire. But who would proudly arrange seats trying to entice guests? I think Chateau, being a teacher, he primarily, as his story goes, lived as a hermit, but people would seek him out for his teachings. So he did end up responding to a number of requests from student monks. And but he always remained somewhat reclusive, not proudly announcing himself. And that may be part of what he understood was appropriate. Turn around the light to shine within, then just return. This is a passage that is echoed again and again, especially in the work of Eihei Dogen, the Japanese teacher who lived several centuries later, of turning the light inward. I think it's a useful metaphor for to keep in mind when sitting meditation in Zazen, turning the light inward. We are so often directing our perceptions outward, thinking that there is an other out there that we need to deal with. Zazen is a time of turning the light inward and just returning. Returning to, in a sense, where we've always been. The vast inconceivable source can't be faced or turned away from. What is this vast inconceivable source? And why can't we face it or turn away from it? Well, we're part of it, aren't we? Something that you can't face. If you're part of something, you can't really face it or turn away from it. It's just always present. And it's that feeling of, that perception of separateness from what we're a part of, that I think the Buddha was referring to as the source of our suffering, our dukkha. That conceit of I am, as he phrases it, that separateness from everything else, which when you think about it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But it's the way our mind works. It's the way our language is constructed. It's what we must free ourselves from again and again. Meet the ancestral teachers. Be familiar with their instruction. Well, who are the ancestral teachers? A lot of the lineage of that's sort of derived in Zen literature is probably somewhat fabricated and fictional. So they talk about the prominent teachers from one era to the next and how the teachings passed seamlessly from one mind to the next. But who are our ancestral teachers? I tend to think of it in a much broader sense. I might include my fourth grade teacher. I might include an English teacher from my senior year in high school. I might include a parent or an aunt or an uncle. I might include my son's violin teacher. As well as the teachers we read about, Master Dogen, Shito, all the others who have labored to bring what wisdom they can muster to the page for us to benefit from. Meet the ancestral teachers and be familiar with their instruction. So Shito is inviting us to explore this literature, to explore our experience, to learn from others. And then he says, bind grasses to build a hut and don't give up. Notice how in the first part of the poem, it's all description about what he has done and what he's doing and what he's perceiving. And then it turns into a prescription, recommendations for us about turning the light within, about meeting ancestral teachers, and about finding grasses to build a hut and not giving up. So what is the hut that we are to build? Well, to confine this to a single interpretation, I think is an injustice. But some ways to think about it would be the life that we lead, the things that are necessary to sustain us, our shelter, find grasses to build a hut. And the shelter that Chateau built was highly sustainable. I think he may not have looked at it that way. He probably looked at it as a sort of simplicity. But now we have a deep appreciation for the importance of sustainability, using what we have. And what could be more sustainable than using a perennial grass to make a shelter out of that comes back each year. And don't give up. So through much of the poem, he's talking about relaxing and being at ease. But here, he encourages us to take care of our life and don't give up. So I think I'll stop there. There's so much more that could be said, and I'll be interested in hearing the comments of others about, I guess, the kinds of things that come up in your mind as you think about this set of verses. And what is Chateau really telling us to do? And who are your ancestral teachers? And what is the hut that Chateau is recommending we build? So we'll stop there and break up into smaller groups for a few minutes and then come back together afterward. Thank you for listening.